It's February the 7th, and we're back in Hampstead talking with Gordon Lawrence. We had a wonderful conversation with him last year, also in inclement weather and darkness. This time we hope to continue the conversation, and we're going to start with looking at this idea of a matrix that Gordon has in his work, and he chose this word very specially and very deliberately to describe what he wanted to do and what he saw happening. So let's start straight away with that, Gordon.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think since the term was first used 20 years ago, one's been able to flesh it out, and particularly in the last few years, because I wanted a configuration, let's call it that, of people, which would reflect, mirror, some kind of word like that, the dream process. And I knew that a group couldn't do that completely, so therefore I've always been trying to hold it in the configuration of matrix. Because it seems to me that matrix, and Fuchs wrote about this, he wrote about the mental associations that people have amongst themselves, and that these mental associations, as it were, go on in quite large numbers of people. So, for example, somebody in the corner of a room might think of something, and somebody in another room will think of much the same thing. And, you can say, well, it's chance or whatever.
Yes.
But I suspect that there's something around about thinking as a wave, to use that analogy, and in a way these waves go around amongst people. That's not a very good description, but
part of the problem is description.
Yeah, but let's try it this way.
Okay.
If you take what the various financial crises which occur, in a way, it's what the people are thinking, we'll say in Singapore or wherever, which gets transmitted, some kind of word like that, transmitted to other people, and they pick up the message, but it may not be actual words that are used, it may not be television that's used or anything like that. It seems to me that these ideas will occur, or ideas will occur at the same time amongst large numbers of people, and they get communicated. Now, this would tie in with the ideas of, we'll say, symbiosis. It would tie in with the ideas that, in fact, maybe everything on the present planet is related, and it's related through thinking and other mental processes. Now, I know that's a rather difficult argument, but that's simply what I would hold on to at the present time. And it seems to me that in the matrix, in a dreaming matrix, that one person will have a set of ideas coming out of their experience, which they put into words, but before they're put into words, they will have been communicated. I mean, I can't describe it any better than that. That, I think, is the stuff of a matrix. That's the life of a matrix. Whereas I think, and I may be being a bit strong in the argument, if we have a group, in a way the discussion of the group is always rational, or tends to be rational,
yes,
etc. And I don't want it to be rational. I want it to be in this free associative, synchronous, serendipitous world, and so on.
Yes.
So that's where I would be.
Well, let's reflect back to you two aspects. Well, we'll start simply with one aspect. That is, you're implying that there is some kind of communication going between people, which we could say, A, they are not directly conscious of happening as such, and B, will not consist of the same components as what we're doing now consists of, that is, words and mental models.
Yeah.
And this kind of communication must be going on all the time, and we don't know how far it is subject to restraints of time and space. So that's already a very extraordinary thing, because it suggests that, for example, a model in which all people, even all people, are in communication at some level which ordinarily they themselves do not access.
Okay, yeah, that I can accept, yeah. Yeah.
So when you said, you started talking about the matrix, you said some phrase like, you want the group to reflect, well, I think it was, that's what you said, reflect the matrix, but it needs something to enable it to do so. And use the words like configuration, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mean you have to do something artificial to enable a group to more substantially reflect the matrix than ordinary life would?
Well, I don't know that it's artificial. I mean, it's a bit like what we discovered the last time, that in a way it's a Faraday cage and you exclude all that may be known about group.
Lovely, yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I do.
So,
you suspend all of that.
You suspend it, yeah, that's better. And you hold it in the configuration of a matrix, because that, I think, helps the thinking idea processes on the dreams.
So initially, it's very interesting to me as an aspect of general method. I say initially, what you have is what could be described as a negative. You restrain something. You refrain from doing something, or you soften or diminish something. So it's just like, essentially, in any process of creative thinking, an essential element is to be able to pause, to hesitate, so to speak. All of that you're sending it to convey to me. So the art in it must be to create conditions in which people are willing to do this and don't find it an effort. So it can't be too much of an effort, otherwise
that's right.
You get reactions.
I mean, I think, that if one's in a matrix, one can see periodically groups forming, as some people might collaborate on a dream, on working on a dream. So that, in a sense, is a group. But it is, so in a sense, it's a bit like looking at like porridge boiling. Occasionally, it'll spurt out, and that'll be a group, and then it'll disappear in the context of the matrix. And that seems to me to be quite appropriate, but then the group doesn't get to the point where its thinking becomes neo-totalitarian. You must think this way, otherwise you can't belong. That isn't an issue in the matrix. It's the thinking which is done as people cooperate about something.
I see. As they cooperate for something about a task or a job or whatever, then they become what you call a group. Then they can become relatively totalitarian.
Yeah, they can do. They could do. I've no doubt about that. But if one holds it in the matrix, what would be the word? Configuration, form, state.
State is good.
You are allowing the free associative thinking to take place. If, however, if we were to think about a group for social dreaming, and it was a group, which I have no intention of doing, it would mean that the group would take up such a position that the takers, or the people who are hosts to the matrix, would become almost authorities in the room. And I've been very, very keen, and I've worked very hard at the idea that just because one is a host or a taker, one isn't an authority. And so therefore, what the host says is of equal importance to everybody. And in this way, it seems to me that one gets out of the issue of transference of the group to the consultant, to use typical terms. And I'm not interested in that. If I hold it in the matrix, I think the transference will be to the dream.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Right?
Yes.
So as a dream is given, one has feelings about the dream, and one relates to it, and these I would just call transference feelings. And in a sense, they're almost divorced from the person speaking them. And so one is still able to remain in this world of stream of consciousness, free associative stream of consciousness.
I mean, I know the word came to my mind, you don't take it in a pejorative sense, I think it has a positive meaning. It's this world of make-believe in a very positive sense. You know, there's people freely allowing themselves to dream. There's something else innocent in it.
Yeah.
You know, and not bothering about what may be factually true or not factually true. So that's why I use the phrase make-believe in a kind of joyous, innocent sense. Because you cannot be, in a way, sophisticated about this, it strikes me. Because, or do people begin to develop, so to speak, skills in doing it? Something you could call a skill or facility in doing it? Or does it always have to be, like, endlessly renewed and restarted? And
well, I think it tends to be the second, in my experience. But rather than the word make-believe, I might suggest the word play.
Play, fine.
Which has got less of a negative connotation in this context.
All right, yes, you can have your play.
And the play, it seems to me, is what we cannot do in everyday life.
Right.
Right?
Yes, quite right.
And if we can play with the dream, in effect, we are playing in a dream, right? So together we're in a dream, and we're playing with the dream, right?
I like it because it touches on, you know, in terms of my own limited experience, moments when I get the sense, hang on, this is just like being in a dream. It's you suddenly have that feeling, it's a certain kind of qualitative feeling.
No, I mean, in a sense, I suppose I'm really trying to create these conditions. I don't think one does it by rules and regulations and so on. I think, in a sense, it has to be done through the presence or being of the person convening the group, the host or the taker, whatever you want to call them. And I think it's that inner work on being in a matrix, which is terribly important. Okay, I'm being a bit self-conscious about it, but then I more or less have to be. I don't think others have to be self-conscious about it. I mean, provided they can recognize that free association is the name of the game.
Yes.
And wherever free association will lead us, it will lead us.
I think we'll probably come back to that cycle. I want you to pause with the being of the convener or the facilitator, whatever it is, because this is very extraordinary. Because there seems to be, in general, a movement away from a role of a person looking after a process or consulting to, as the person who says, this, you do it this way, you don't do it that way, leading that way, to less and less of a doing role. And so naturally one must come back to looking at it in terms of a being role, where there is not an action of one place on another place. And this, strangely, of course, as you well realize, coincides so precisely with the issues that Bohm raised, which arise in quantum mechanics about a global process and not a local process. In other words, it's not by me acting on you that something happens, but we two are engaged in the same pattern. So all these shifts of, I think, of model, of perspective and so on have happened recently, until you can actually, and would you say that, say, 10, 20 years ago, you couldn't have talked to an audience about one's being influencing a group at all? Or would that be too much of an exaggeration?
Well, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but you're not very far wrong in terms of time. I would say, let's say 40 years.
40 years, okay.
I mean, 40 years ago, a social scientist model was to stand behind a one-way screen and watch people doing things, because then the scientists wouldn't contaminate the process. But I think it was the quantum scientists who said, you can't do that, you know, you've got to be in it, or you have to be in it, because you're part of it. and you have to work at that dimension of it. And that, I think, led to a change in thinking on the part, on the subject of subjectivity and objectivity and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And being, it seems to me, is to be in studied subjectivity. In other words, not mindless subjectivity, but studied, you know, that you're actually working at the issue of subjectivity and trying to sort it out. So that's the theme that I would pick up. And I think in the social dreaming matrix, that the takers, or calling them that, the hosts, conveners, they have to be, they have to be working all the time at this notion of studied subjectivity. Because in a way you're listening for the dream and you're saying, well, what's the connection with that? Is there a connection? And so on and so forth.
Yes.
Right?
This is, I think, it's a very significant statement, because it's pointing to a particular kind of inner work. The person you call the taker. The person has to take. And could you comment on it in terms of what is popularly known as lucid dreaming? You know, people practice this where they bring into the dream world a kind of alertness which is usually characteristic of the waking state. That means they can have this reflective awareness within the dream. And I wondered whether there are any structural parallels here, or it's simply an irrelevance to what you're interested in.
Well, I think it, from my point of view, I think lucid dreaming is an oxymoron in the sense that it starts from the premise that you can control your dream. And my belief is that dream is a gift from your inner world. And if you try to control it, you're actually cutting yourself off from a whole range of material which are essentially truly unconscious. And I think at the lucid dreaming, but I don't know all that much about it, I think the lucid dreaming sounds very good because the fantasy is that you can control your dream. And I just don't believe this. I mean, it comes down to a matter of belief. But I can imagine the attractiveness of it. Because in a way, sorry?
No, I was going to say, I see where you're going in a way, if I can respond back to you at this stage, because you say the whole point of the dream is its spontaneity. So why interfere with that spontaneity by superimposing something you already know?
Yes, that's right, that would make sense to me.
Because I'm now attracted to looking at the thread of the content of the dreams as in the topic we mentioned last time, the diagram by Ullman, I think it was, dreams as a transitional region, because there's a wonderful deep question here of what is actually upwelling or emerging from the deeper unconscious, which can be said to have valuable content to it, content of value, content contributing towards meaning, content contributing towards right action, even in some of your contexts. This is a reality, isn't it? So people are involved in making changes and responsibilities. Is looking at this apparent puzzle, and it may only be apparent because of the way we think about it, that how can something come unbidden out of the darkness, which is in a way more intelligent than the product of our accumulated study is. That's a very awkward way around it, but you understand why I'm trying to distinguish it.
I think, are you saying that essentially the dream is telling you the truth? At least you can work from that proposition, and then you can test it against reality and so on and so forth. I think that the idea of the spontaneity of the dream does mean, I guess, that a lot of material that may be produced may not seem to be relevant on first inspection. And but I think that the social dreaming matrix values every dream.
Yes.
And it's what the people decide is worth pursuing. It will be pursued. I don't think there's anybody can come in and sort of state a law that you must follow that or you must follow that. So I think it's that open-ended atmosphere that I think I want to be attempting to engender, because then things don't get foreclosed. Yeah.
No, not foreclosed. No, it's interesting. You now have two kinds of openness. There's openness towards the dream.
Yeah.
There's another openness towards the, in a sense, the free intent of those involved in the process. Like saying, this is how I take this is how I apply this, this is how I see the connection, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's another area of freedom, and it's curious, you need to have the two, because nothing will happen if you don't have the two.
Yeah, that would be true. And I think in that freedom, authority works in quite a strange way, because it's almost as if to take authority to free associate, to put it that way, is quite a leap, because in a way you're stepping out of all the thinking processes that hold society together, or we think hold society together. And I think that move requires the authority of the being of the person. I mean, it applies to everybody. It requires that authority of being, which in a way can't be. You can't do it on a model of delegation or anything like that. I mean, it is about the authority of that person to do that. It's not that he or she is told to do it. It's something that they have to work out for themselves. That's what it would seem to me.
This is, and possibly both of us will find is incredibly subtle, this issue of authority. You know, the word, it says authority comes from author. It's the production of a word.
No.
And as soon as something comes into the word and you have any sense of a person standing behind it, then he becomes an authority, making an assertion, and other people have to then react or respond to that. But when I hear you describe your process, I can see so much of it like enabling people not to have to deal with each other in that way at all. That is, not to react to what each other says and say, what I agree with you or I don't agree with you at all, because if you get into that realm, then you get into a realm which is going to be subject to authority.
Yes.
So you can't work in the matrix according to even to agreement and disagreement. That becomes irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, there never is, in my experience, any arguments in a social dream matrix, because people recognize that there's no place for it. But to pick up on your idea of authority and author, and you said the author of words, which is how we think about it, and I accept that. But I think it's the author of ideas, the author of thinking and thoughts.
Yes.
Which doesn't have to be spoken, as we both know. So in a sense, it seems to me one has an experience, and one one authorizes, or some kind of word like that.
I see.
The ideas which the experience brings out. At the same time, of course, we must remember that memory is also operating. And as we see the patterns emerging in front of us, we'll be reworking our past. I mean, we're always reworking our past and recreating it. But the holding on to the idea that the author of the ideas takes authority to think these ideas. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Now this
I think
is
I've got that right, but I'm not sure.
that's the when you started speaking about this way of looking at it, I was aware of, perhaps I interposed in my own, or there emerged in me another different thought, which relates to what I hope we get onto, David Bohm's idea of the active information field. We get a kind of like impersonal authorship of what we can call ideas, because I think that's implicit in his description, his model. Then we have the point at which, and here I'm going to really scramble language, hope you forgive me, sort of a person downloads from the field and begins to utter something. And at that point there is like a sense of commitment, of risk-taking, of authentication. It's like my body is at the disposal of this. I invest in this. It's not neutral to me any longer at that point. And I'm wondering, Gordon, about, because I've had just a few experiences and I've seen this happening with other people in group, where they can come out with something which might be an expression of an idea which is partly strange to them. And they want to say, well, it's not strictly speaking that I believe in this idea, but I utterly agreed to saying it. I wonder if you can, it's a little bit tangled here. Wonder if you explicate what is involved here. I think it's terribly important. I know it's important for me personally.
I've seen this occur. But there was something you said that maybe, and notice I'm saying maybe, we think with our bodies. You know, our fantasy is we think with our minds.
Oh, isn't it awful?
Right? That we may think with our bodies because I think it's, bacteria can organize themselves in extraordinary ways. They're obviously communicating.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
And so in a sense we think with every cell of our body, if I can put it that way, maybe inaccurate. Yes. And it's that impression which I think the matrix furthers. It's these impressions which are what one brings to bear to the matrix. I mean, and I therefore think that ideas, which are dreams are the currency of a matrix, but the ideas that come from the dreams are also the currency.
Yes.
And I think that's what one's dealing with. Don't know that.
Well, it's curious in the way you started talking about the matrix and this belief, and I'm sure there is already this implicit sort of communication between everybody, or implicit communication between everybody. But I like to sort of ask very naive questions here, and I say, well, it's like there is something I quite passionately feel about this, something like new or fresh information coming into the human world. You know, now to ask, where does this come from? You know, and to look at the standard kinds of answers that people give, one kind of answer is God, another kind of answer is the unconscious, and you've raised a third kind of answer, which is the body. You know, some people say the very living physical evolution in our bodies is so intelligent, is already creating something which rises through our cells into our nervous systems and utters in images, and there's this constant flow, so to speak, most of which is blocked because otherwise we couldn't have our ordinary state of consciousness with that being submerged in that flow. But I'm sure that the French have an expression, dans mes tripes, you know, in my guts. Well, Americans
and
too.
I know that you know, certainly in working class culture in Britain, there'll be expressions which are bodily centered.
Yes.
But they're really about what they're thinking. Right? So, a Scots person a Scots woman might say she has a sore heart. Now, literally, she doesn't have a sore heart, but metaphorically, she does. You know, I mean, I can't think of any more examples, but it seems to me that in a way that's an aspect of language which we have schooled out of society.
Oh, absolutely, I passionately agree with you.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing book I came across by a man called Onans, called The Origins of Modern European Thought. And the book is not about what the title sounds like. It's not about philosophy. It's about this physio-psychological matrix almost people lived in.
Yeah, yeah.
And you take a common word which has now gone, really faded out, the word pluck. He's plucky. You know what I mean, having courage.
Yeah.
Pluck was a word used for the heart and lungs of animals.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And because that's where courage was.
Yeah, yeah.
In the early Greeks, ideas were in the lungs.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, yeah.
And you go through that, and you can, this book is marvelous, you know, because it's just as you say, nearly all of this has got schooled out of us, and so we have this absolute, I take it with personal affront, you know, kind of, the world of ideas is dominated by Plato, so to speak. It's up there in the hierarchy, and not down here in my organism. And again, a split happens, which is just beginning to break between, say, software and hardware. My body is just a machine. It has a software, which is the mind. The one is indifferent to the other. And I regard that as a hellish position to be in, because it gives us no flow.
Yeah. But it's a bit like, I was thinking as you were talking, that you could talk about soul in the English lesson if you were reading poetry, but you couldn't talk about it in the science lesson. You know,
Yes.
there were different words for different places.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And,
Which is absurd, because it's just a human being, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know. And this whole thing about mind is extraordinary. You know, you use the term in passing, because again, all ancient people, I mean, going back more than 2,000 years ago, and it's the same in India as in Greece, all that kind of what we now call spirituality, ideas of mind, were incredibly concrete and physiological. You know, like in the Hindus, the Atman, the perfect man, was actually about 2 inches high and in the heart, physically present. In time, it becomes some kind of abstract state of being, like something out of Bradley. You know, a metaphysical entity. And that's been the story of the last 2,000 years. Alienation from our own bodies.
Yes, I would totally agree with that. And nowadays, I noticed what I've been reading recently, that it's Capra, The Web of Life, who's got an interesting passage on spirit, you know, that spirit is what animates us, which of course is the body spirit which animates us, that allows us to experience and to have ideas and to think and so on and so forth. And it sort of makes kind of sense to me.
Yes. Because you used just now, picked up about that, we have to use, we use the term metaphor a lot now, to sort of like, I use it a lot, to excuse myself for talking about things in a way which I really like to talk about literally. But I use the word metaphor apologetically. It's like spirit, you know, and spirus, inspiration, respiration, has a source in air, and this incredible collective human experience of the significance of breathing as essential to who and what we are. And the horror that now in the ordinary world, this is no longer present, is no longer there as a reality. You say, well, of course we breathe, it's just to provide energy to the organism, full stop. But the idea that it's like the breath of God, or there is a spirit in a mountain, in a place, or like your paintings here, these are spirit paintings. We have let's pause a bit here, because I raised the question of where the new information comes from, and I think I want to evoke out of you any other alternative. It may be a wrong kind of question to ask. And so there's the idea of God or higher powers, there's some idea of the unconscious, there's some idea of life, the organism, the cellular reality of people. I just wondered if you come across a different kind of explanation, or whether you consider it not worthwhile considering at all, because the question is not correctly framed.
No, I think it is worthwhile considering. I just find myself a bit ignorant and couldn't, as it were, sustain it perhaps for very long. But I do believe that, you know, there's a lot about that, about the information that we get from, as it were, being in the universe. And I think information in this context may be wrong. I think it's ideas we get from being in the universe. I mean, that's how knowledge grows. And in a sense, you could talk about a thinking universe.
Yes.
And it seems to me that information is an idea of almost objectifying information. And then you get into what you might term a mega technology, that this is scientific, therefore everybody must believe the same, and you mustn't diverge from it. And I think this growth of mega technology is a bit worrying, because the other bits of this, which you've been alluding to, just get screened out. They fall into desuetude. They fall into disuse.
There's a lot of, in your last comments, Gordon, there's a lot of very deep connected issues. And one is about, a comment is my background in history, philosophy of science. I've always taken the emergence of this, I call it a category of information, as being very significant in science. And I was aware of how long it took to get the category of energy, hundreds of thousands of years, you see, in the category of matter. And now we have these three categories, and they give us some kind of flexibility and breadth for understanding. But I do agree with you, one can then get this reductionism with it. Where is the knowledge we have lost in information, as T.S. Eliot cried. And so we need, and you keep on using the term ideas, and the idea of living in the universe. So let's try and get some kind of concrete picture. Is it a picture like this, like from very early on, when people went out at night and looked up at the stars, and that was in itself, in that looking, of thinking was being generated, was being created in people?
Yes, indeed. I mean, in a way, that's the miraculous, wonderful aspect of being a human being. I mean, that we're thinking all the time. And then, of course, we categorize it, so on and so forth. And in that process, very often destroy what essentially is there. That's what it seems to me, anyway.
Yes, because you're treating thinking not as a kind of like a specific skilled function, but as something which is organic, which is social, which is natural.
I mean, it's interesting that I was showing you the thing that I've been invited to do in Oxford, which is to do social dreaming with one's a Church of England vicar, and the other is professor of theology or whatever. And the idea is to explore, through knowledge, dreaming as in the past, dreaming as in the Bible, and so on and so forth, and dreaming of William Blake, for example, and it to be also doing it every day, to be working at it every day.
Oh, I see.
So I think that these two things coming together, I hope, will make for a very interesting conference. And I think that's maybe a way forward, because you can look at Blake, you can see his paintings and so on and so forth, and I think you've got to be in a state to receive them.
Yes. Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Otherwise, they just become objects that you have as picture postcards or whatever. This idea of being ready to receive, I think it's an important one. It's being available for, and in a way, the Matrix, you're available for dreams, right?
Yes.
and
Yes.
you're available for the thinking that goes with it. You're available for the free associations. And that being available, it's always being at the disposition of society or whatever. I think it's something important to be held on to. Yeah.
Yes, I like that very much. It's the notion of, in a certain kind of description, I don't need to go along with this totally, but I've always found it very valuable that there's a two-way process between us and, you call it in one context, the higher powers, whatever. It really is a two-way process. And unless, as you say, this more transcendental element is invited in, it cannot come, it cannot step in, it cannot overtake oneself. There has to be this degree of voluntarism, of commitment, of making available, that this is in fact a very, very special and delicate act of will which people make. I am willing, I am here, I am available.
Yes.
Is an incredibly positive act to take.
I mean, on the theme of transcendence, I remember reading an article about 15, 20 years ago where some researcher was looking at the incidence of transcendence in particular cultures. But the conclusion he came to was that unless you had the, unless you were disponible, unless you were available for transcendence within yourself, you could never see it outside.
Right, it's never an object, is it?
That's right, which is, in a way is, what's outside is also inside.
Yes.
And this problem we've never really been able to sort out satisfactorily. I think it is what's in the, I think it's the work it's one doing in the inner world which enables you to what's the word? It wouldn't be see, but to construct the outer world. I mean, it just isn't a matter of it isn't a matter of perception.
Yes,
there's some sort of process goes on in between that you have to, I said, well, make it inside yourself, and then this interaction will take place.
With in relationship to that, I was thinking a moment ago about along this whole theme we're exploring of accessing knowledge, ideas, a thinking which is already there in the matrix, so to speak. And then we're coming to me, the one form of it which is pretty rare now in our society is to do with what would be described as observing nature. That is going out and seeing nature. Now this would be taken in a Western modern sense as going out and observing, that is being external to what you look at. And it was that made me very enamored of what started with Tinbergen and Lorenz and someday E.O. Wilson when they talk about the naturalist trance, which was exactly this process in observing nature, where they make themselves available for phenomena to show themselves. As you know, the work of Wilson, he goes into the Amazon forest and he takes it like a frame and it becomes still. But this stillness is not going to sleep. And the stillness does not exclude his knowledge, but the stillness enables him to see things which have not been seen before. But for most of us, we're hardly in touch of natural living processes like that. So perhaps what you're doing with dreams is one of the most effective means that we can have, because people are not in contact with natural process, with trees, animals, the seasons, and you feel that ancient people, when they experienced these, weren't just there was that subject experiencing those objects, but that was thinking.
I mean, I think the problem is that the Aboriginal in Taiwan, who sort of used to give prayers to the tree before he lopped it down or whatever, he recognized that the tree had some living quality. But at the moment we put a label on it, animism,
Oh, isn't it? Yes.
which of course was then used by the missionaries and so on and so forth, and their job was to root out animism, and because the only true God
Were their boss.
that's right, yeah, whether he's Catholic, Presbyterian, or what. But in that rooting out, we, as it were, cut ourselves off from beliefs which we're now beginning to see the evidence for. For example, if I read Fritjof Capra, I'm beginning to see the evidence for that phenomena, which hitherto we've called animism.
Yes.
I can't get the pronunciation.
Animism, yes.
So
that which animates.
yeah. So I think that would maybe take us to, this idea of the politics of salvation and revelation.
That's what I was thinking of. Excellent.
Okay, fine. Because in a way, I think that I've stuck with the idea of revelation, which at first I called it generativity, and then I sort of, maybe mistakenly or whatever, when I was writing one night, called it, instead of generativity, I called it salvation, revelation as opposed to salvation. And I think this idea of revelation is embedded in what we've said so far, that we're actually making ourselves available for experiences, and that's quite hard, because I mean lots of events and happenings a lot of events and happenings occur every day.
Yes.
But how do you move from event or happening to an experience? And I think it requires something about what we've been saying about the inner life of the individual. I think that inner life which is brought to bear, whatever one wants to call it, is available, I know I'm using the word time and again, is available for a new experience which may have been experienced in a certain way by millions of people, and that's what you believe is so. So, for example, the scientific ideas of Galileo, from Galileo onwards, I mean, that was the way you looked at it. Then it takes the quantum people in the 20th century to say, well, wait a minute, that's maybe not like that at all. And they saw it in a different way. And I think this idea of of seeing things in a different way is what Revelation's about. I mean, you don't take for granted and you don't accept what is deemed to be common reality. I mean, you work it out for yourself. I mean, I think that's how you start. And it seems to me that in consultancy, in organizations, that the idea of working at Revelation is to work with the people so as they get authority to examine their world. Whereas if I just take that simple idea, it's the authority that the manager takes to see his world, the authority that the worker takes to see his world, which is far more important than any other authority. But we tend to work on the basis of salvation, whereby a company is failing, somebody comes in and sorts the company out, right? Now, he can get it to work, that's no problem. But the problem is that the people left in the organization have no authority to do it. The authority came from this person from the outside. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely clear, I see. So it's not theirs.
It's not theirs.
And it's liable to depart from them any moment.
Yes, yes. And this is why, you know, that always that after a consultancy assignment, there's been lots of work done in the national health system where the, you know, the big 5 consultants come in and impose a solution, and then after they've gone, then they have to go and get other people to try and help them to sort it out.
Mop up.
To mop up, or some kind of word like that. But basically, it's about authority and being the author of one's own feelings and ideas to experience. You know.
And I had a comment about the revelation from, the side of revelation from science, because what came vividly into my mind as I was hearing you talk was the incredible significance of what seemed to be very small moments and very small particular moments of individuals in science. I think, for example, of Kepler. And Kepler, who worked on planetary orbits, you know, spent 16 years working out the orbit of Mars, and then found it did not fit the data that Tycho Brahe had. So 16 years of work he just put aside and started all over again, which produced the elliptical orbits which laid the foundation for Newton's work. I thought, but he was astonished. He was in a unique position, unique position to actually take on board that information as authoritative over him. This I respect. And another sort of example, of course, Max Planck looking at the problem black body radiation. He said, because of this, I have to accept, and I don't like it, I have to accept that energy is quantized. You see? And it seemed in these sort of cases, you get an individual who lets, and this is why they're remarkable, lets a piece of new information actually have authority over them, if I can put it in that convoluted way. Actually, it's so real. Say, I cannot deny this, and this strikes me as being such a special and rare and beautiful and powerful ingredient in human life, which is not realized, because I think the common assumption is, oh, the information's there, of course I can take it in. I read it in a book, somebody tells me, of course I listen to them. But it's not true. Because this willingness to allow it to enter one is an incredibly deep thing.
Yeah. I think in a way this is what the matrix attempts to do. I mean, the experience of the matrix, one has to allow in, which is what you're saying. And in a way, you then, as it were, go on and create new knowledge or construct new knowledge, which fits a matrix and holds in suspension ideas about group. You know, you could, as it were, explain matrix in terms of group.
Yes.
You know, by taking the data over.
Yeah.
And really what I'm trying to do is to stick with matrix and to pick out, when necessary, information from other disciplines. But the idea is that the matrix is a unique thing which is there to be studied. Right? It's there to be experienced and studied, be a better way of putting it. And so therefore one would come up with different ideas than that which existed hitherto. And that, it seems to me, is a continual process of revelation, because, I mean, the revelation goes on, as it were, every 10 minutes, so to speak. I mean, it goes on all the time. Whereas if you're in a salvation mode, you're there to, as it were, save the group, and indeed save the individuals from any disturbing thoughts, anything which might disturb their equilibrium.
Precisely.
Right?
Yes. That's the one thing you want to be protected from, that sort of disturbance and the need to think again.
Yeah. Well, I think this belief about being protected from disturbances has become magnified. So it's a standard excuse for people to say, oh, we couldn't do that because it might upset the workers, right? Meaning it might upset the mental state or whatever. And this, of course, is sheer arrant nonsense. It's a projection on the part of the manager, the person who's stating it. Because I think people are far more strong than they believe.
Amen. Yes.
Right?
Yes. I think you're quite right to associate this sort of rejection of disturbance from those who are in a position of feeling they have authority over other people. It tends to be associated with them. If it's just the person themselves, then they're much freer.
Yeah. And in a way, you see, I know that I can't necessarily back this argument up, but that wonderful book, The Making of the English Working Classes by, I forget, E.P. Thompson. I mean, it's a stunning book, because in the early part he's sort of saying, look, these people had the mechanics institutes and so on and so forth. They had a healthy culture and so on and so forth. and gradually it was eroded with a system of schooling and so on and so forth. So in fact, the earlier culture, which we're all familiar with, was destroyed for the sake of industrialization. And I think I mean, it's a very salutary tale and wonderfully researched. What I'm really saying, I think, is that people know far more than they think they do.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
But they have to fit in with the opinion of those who are the elites or whatever, or the establishment or whatever.
Pay their wages.
Yeah, sure.
This kind of thing. See, can I, since you come on to something which is slightly political in its tone, and so I think it has to be addressed here. There's a kind of radicalism in this which has a history, I think, isn't it? Which is this respect for the individual in a very, very strong sense. And it doesn't require to be trained or to absorb a certain kind of cultural clothing to be regarded as intelligent and capable of making decisions. There is something intrinsic in people. And in a way, this is still, on the whole, threatening to the social establishment, who must, I think, in principle, regard this with some suspicion. Because it's saying, whatever we're doing here, you will not have control over what these people think. Because by the nature of it, they are being liberated to think whatever wants to think through them.
Yeah. I mean, I could give an example. About 40 years ago, and in those days, I was at the University of Durham, and we had started doing some work in group relations, and we had an invitation to work in a further education college. And I think 2 or 3 of us did it, and we cooperated with the liberal studies teachers, the people teaching the apprentices English. And anyway, we set it up and we designed it with them. The important thing was that the English teacher said, we never knew they had a vocabulary like this. Right? They had a very sophisticated vocabulary to describe their experiences. And the second point was that by the end of it, they had worked out that if they were really to pursue this course, what I would now call the politics of revelation, that they would be out of work. And so, in a sense, and I felt so immensely sad that they were sort of saying, look, it's been a great adventure, but, you know, we'll leave it as it is. It's like Churchill said, you know, that occasionally people stumble over truth, but they pick themselves up and hurry on.
Hurry on. Do it. I think we're coming to the last few minutes. I want to make a remark and see how I'd like to make some kind of overview or conclusion about this, because what's come into my mind in speaking with you to do with the politics of revelation is that it's sort of like saying the revelation is really that any individual can be in the place of revelation. It doesn't have to be reliant on anybody else or any circumstances or any structure for doing it. And that is, in a way, I think in what you're doing, that you are expressing a kind of generic revelation about the human reality. You know.
I don't think one has to be a mystic or a guru. I think everybody is capable of it.
Excellent.
All right. Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gordon, so much. This is so exciting.